Hello and welcome back to the Genealogy Radio Show, the show that is keeping you in the loop. We are out from Radio Corcabashkin in the beautiful Kilkee, and our show is repeated on a Sunday at 4 p.m, as well as going out as a podcast. Now today we've got a special show for you. We have been working with Patty and Stephen, welcome to the show, on their family history project, and we'll be asking them some questions and familiarising you all with this project today. So to begin, what inspired you to start researching your family history, and how long have you been working on this project?
This is Steve. I started researching this about 55 years ago, on and off for decades. And I was inspired to do it because of the television program Roots, which was based on the book by Alex Haley. And that miniseries ran in the 1970s in the United States. And it recounted the efforts of Alex Haley to trace his family back through slavery back to Africa. And I realized when I inquired of my parents and grandparents that they knew very little about their ancestors' immigration from Ireland. And that's what got me started.
Yeah, that's incredibly interesting. Can you tell us some family anecdotes that stand out throughout your research?
Well, I'll mention one and then pass the baton to Patty. A story we heard about all the time over the years were our parents' references to Uncle Bill's still blowing up, in reference to my grandfather's Uncle William Cummings, who apparently was running a still in Wisconsin. I pictured a small little still somewhere in the back of a barn. Apparently, this was during Prohibition, and he was running a giant commercial size still in his barn that took up the entire barn. And by the way, he was a former Chicago police officer. And the still blew up, taking the barn with it, bringing in the fire companies from the entire surrounding area. And he was brought to federal court and fined. But reflecting the ambivalent attitudes of that time, he received a relative slap on the wrist because, frankly, probably half the county was drinking his hooch. But that story really came to light when Patty found the articles from the newspapers of the time that reported on it. Right, Patty?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite stories. The location of where the barn was is about 15 miles from me. So I've been by there a couple of times, and it's just a fun family story.
And a less than fun story was when I discovered when I was talking to my mother's cousin, Sally Cummings, who told me that her father ran away from the family farm at age 15 and ran away to Chicago, where he undoubtedly stayed with relatives. And I asked her why he ran away from the farm. And she said, well, you don't understand how hard life was on the farm back in those days. She said when his father's horse would get too tired to pull the plow, his father would put the harness on himself and he would pull the plow until he couldn't do it anymore. And then he would put the plow on his 15-year-old son and have him pull the plow until he couldn't do it anymore. And her father finally got tired of that life and ran away. And I never even knew that. Nobody ever spoke of that. But that gives you an insight into what life was like on the farm back at the turn of the last century.
Thank you for that. Considering what you've learned so far, could you tell us what life was like for the early Irish immigrant in Wisconsin?
I'll just start us off, but then Patty, I think you're in a much better situation to expand. I think that the first thing that has to be understood is how harsh the weather is, or how extreme the weather is in Wisconsin as compared to Ireland. It can regularly get 38 degrees above 0 Celsius in the summer and negative 38 degrees below 0 Celsius in the winter. And I know that the original Irish immigrant, William Cummings, and his family lived in a log cabin. So to survive in these extremely cold temperatures with recurrent blizzards that might have put 2 or 3 feet of snow on the ground would have taken months of wood splitting, months of preservation of food, because their nearest neighbors would have been quite some distance in those days. And the conditions would have been extremely difficult. But Patty, you can expand on that.
I think that the South Central Wisconsin geography and landscape is almost identical to what I've seen in the part of Ireland that they came from. The agriculture, farming, mostly dairy farming, some beef, and forestry is very big around here. And I think it probably looked very welcoming to them when they got here. And it was just a good place to pick up and continue farming.
It's very rich farmland. The topsoil is about 12 feet deep, and it's really is a wonderful place to farm, even though the weather would have been a shock to their system.
Throughout your research into the Cummings family, is there anything that you discovered that particularly surprised you?
Patty, you want to start us out?
I thought that there would be more. I thought the history in Ireland would go back further. I was surprised to see that there was some French and different areas included, but that's always fun to learn.
Yeah, I would second that. I think that most of us here would have overestimated the Celtic background and underestimated the Norman background. And I think Lorna has made clear that to a moral certainty, the Cummings family, our Cummings ancestors, were of Anglo-Norman ancestry. And I was surprised at 2 other things. I never knew anything about the Gallowglass. I had no idea that our ancestors' family, going back a few hundred years, were mercenary soldiers for hire. And I think I always assumed that that my great grandparents were simply engaged in the normal Irish farming on their small plots. And I think what's becoming clear from Lorna's research is that they were herding cattle and sheep and bullying in the summer and moving back and forth from the hills, which also explains why they were moving around from townland to townland during the colder months and why it was so hard for us to research them from back here in America.
Within your research, did you find any new relatives that you didn't know you have found? And if you have you managed to make contact with them?
Yes, and I think that Patty and I both had the same experience. When my ancestors moved to Chicago, they all settled in what's known as the Irish South Side. And so growing up, I not only knew my first cousins, but also a very large number of my second cousins. But in this process, we tracked down and reached out to third cousins around the country in New York, Virginia, Florida, California, and so on. And I've gotten to know a number of them, and that's been really interesting and very enlightening. Patty, how about you?
Yes, I agree. But I'm hoping to find more family in Ireland.
Yes, that would be fun.
And could you tell us where is your family from, for our listeners who don't know about your family research? What family do you have, and what are the main areas that they reside in?
So here again, the William Cummings, our original Irish immigrant, entered the country in New Jersey, and after about a decade or more, went west to Wisconsin, which at that time would still have been considered to be part of the frontier. And he settled near the Lake Delavan, in a number of, he was between Patty, Darien and Delavan actually. And all of the immediate family stayed in that area and farmed in the Delavan, Darien, Johnstown, Whitewater area. Patty's branch of the family, which she can explain, stayed mostly in Wisconsin. My branch of the family came largely to Chicago, and lives even today on the Irish South Side, primarily in a neighborhood called Beverly, which is about 80% Irish, probably about 40,000 residents in our neighborhood. And, and our family, even though it has spread out somewhat, it's still all within a 20 or 30-minute drive of the Beverly neighborhood. Patty, how much is your family spread out in Wisconsin?
Well, I would say all over Wisconsin now. I mean, they came to the South Central area for farming, but that was turn of the century or 1860s. So since then, they have spread all over.
And just to give people in Ireland an idea of, give them a sense of the size of the Wisconsin region that you're talking about, because Wisconsin's a very big state.
Yeah, it's huge. I don't know what it would be in comparison to Ireland.
I can tell you that when we drove our daughter from Chicago is just south of the Wisconsin border. And when we drove our daughter to summer camp in northwestern Wisconsin, it was a 12-hour drive. So it's a big place.
Could you explain your plan with your publication of the Cummings family?
Well, the plan is to publish a book that recounts the history of the family in Ireland to the extent we know it, and then describes the early generations here in the United States, and follows the family narratives of their descendants as they spread out around the country. We hope to work with Lorna's team and with all of you over the next couple of months in pulling together the research and drafting the narrative and including documents and photographs to the extent we can. And then in early summer, we're already in touch with various publishing companies. And early in the summer, we plan to submit the manuscript and hopefully have it published by late summer, early fall.
That's brilliant. And when you started your research, was there anything in particular that you were hoping to find, or any point of interest in particular that you guys were focusing on?
Patty, I'll lead off. I think to me, when I say we, various family members here in the States have been trying to research William Cummings' origin back in Ireland for a long time. And this includes people who are quite adept at online genealogical research. And we were making no headway at all. His obituary stated that he was from Timahoe, but we got nowhere. And that was true even when we went to Ireland and looked at the original sources in person. What we did not understand at the time was that he wasn't actually from the town of Timahoe. He was his family lived in surrounding townlands, but they were moving around all the time. And his researching, as we found out from Lorna, researching through those sorts of records for that sort of life was exceedingly difficult. So I would say that for me, it was simply finding out as much as we could about him prior to his immigration and his family in Ireland. And it turns out my wife, we have found, is actually a distant cousin of mine. Her mother was a Cummings. And we were always trying to find out where we connected back in the family line. So those were my primary focuses. But I have to say also, I think I told Patty when Patty and I first connected some years ago, I said that the Chicago Cummingses always wondered what happened to the Wisconsin Cummingses. And she said, we were always wondering the same thing about the Chicago Cummingses. So a lot of the fun of this project has been connecting with second and third cousins in Wisconsin and around the country. Our parents and grandparents would have known each other well, but as it always goes, you move down in time and we lose touch with each other. And that's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. It's so great to hear from you guys. And luckily for all of our listeners, this will be a 3-part series for this show. So we will be hearing more about the Cummings family and the research that we are undertaking at the moment. So thank you so much, Patty and Steve, for joining us today. It's been absolutely brilliant to hear from you.
Thank you, and thanks to everybody.
Thank you. And thanks to all our hosts for a great show today, and Lorna for facilitating us as always. So we air out from Radio Corcabashkin in Kilkee. Our show is repeated on a Sunday at 4 p.m. And for those of you who don't reach those, we have a podcast available also after. So thank you so much for listening. This is the Genealogy Radio Show, the show that is keeping you in the loop.